In the ancient corridors of human memory, there exists a love so profound, so incomprehensible, that it defies every rational boundary the mind can construct. Imagine standing at the edge of total annihilation, watching as everything you have ever known crumbles into ash and dust, and yet finding within your trembling heart not hatred, not bitterness, but a love that burns brighter than the very flames consuming your world. This is not fiction. This is not fantasy. This is the sacred story of Hosea and Gomer, a tale written in blood, tears, and divine mystery that echoes through the centuries, challenging everything we believe about love, faithfulness, and the relentless pursuit of the human heart by the divine. As we journey together through this story of betrayal and redemption, I invite you to subscribe and join our exploration of these profound biblical truths that continue to shape our understanding of love itself. The sun rose over the hills of Samaria with deceptive gentleness, casting golden light across a land that stood on the precipice of judgment. The northern kingdom of Israel, in those days of prosperity and pride, had grown fat with abundance and drunk with idolatry. The people who had once trembled at Mount Sinai now danced before carved images, offering their devotion to lifeless stone and corrupted wood. The covenant that had been sealed with the blood of lambs and the thunder of divine presence had been cast aside like yesterday's garment, forgotten in the pursuit of pleasure and the intoxication of false gods. Into this world of spiritual adultery, the Lord God Almighty called forth a prophet, a man whose very life would become a living parable, a walking sermon of divine love and human betrayal. His name was Hosea, son of Beeri, and he walked among his people with the weight of heaven pressing upon his shoulders. A prophet's calling is never gentle, never easy, but what the Lord commanded of Hosea transcended all reasonable expectation. The word of the Lord came to him with crystalline clarity, penetrating his soul with instructions that would have caused any other man to flee into the wilderness. The Lord spoke, and his words carried the weight of eternity, as recorded in the book of Hosea chapter 1 verses 2 through 3. The command was simple, yet devastating in its implications. Hosea was to take for himself a wife of whoredom, to marry a woman given to promiscuity, a woman whose heart wandered like the wind, whose faithfulness was as fleeting as morning mist on the mountains. Why would the Holy One command such a thing? What divine purpose could be served by yoking his chosen messenger to a woman destined for betrayal? The answer lies in the profound mystery of symbolism and sacred representation. Hosea's marriage would become a living metaphor, a flesh and blood illustration of Israel's relationship with their God. Just as Gomer would betray Hosea's faithful love, so too had Israel betrayed the covenant love of Yahweh, abandoning the one who had delivered them from Egyptian bondage, who had parted seas and rained bread from heaven, who had fought their battles and planted them in a land flowing with milk and honey. Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, entered Hosea's life like a summer storm, beautiful and tempestuous, carrying within her the seeds of both ecstasy and anguish. Her beauty was undeniable, the kind that turned heads in the marketplace and caused men to stumble over their own feet. But beauty, unanchored to character and divorced from faithfulness, becomes a curse rather than a blessing. Hosea saw her, and in obedience to the divine command that burned in his chest like a consuming fire, he took her as his wife. He loved her with the kind of love that builds homes and plants gardens, that dreams of children playing in courtyards and gray hair shared in the twilight of life. He loved her the way a prophet loves, with intensity and devotion, with prayers whispered in the darkness and hopes rising with each dawn. For a season, perhaps there was happiness. Perhaps Gomer smiled in the morning light and felt the unfamiliar warmth of genuine affection. Perhaps she marveled at a man who looked at her not as an object of conquest but as a partner in covenant. Children were born to their union. First came a son, whom the Lord commanded to be named Jezreel, a name that carried the weight of coming judgment, echoing the valley where King Jehu had spilled royal blood and inaugurated a dynasty that would itself face divine reckoning, as written in Hosea chapter 1 verse 4. Then came a daughter, and the Lord's instruction grew darker still. She was to be called Lo Ruhamah, meaning no mercy or not pitied, for God declared he would no longer show mercy to the house of Israel, as recorded in Hosea chapter 1 verse 6. Finally, another son, and his name would cut deepest of all, Lo-Ammi, meaning not my people, for the Lord proclaimed that Israel was no longer his people and he would not be their God, as stated in Hosea chapter 1 verse 9. These children, bearing names like prophecies of doom, grew in a household where love battled against inevitable heartbreak. Hosea watched his wife with increasing awareness, noting the distracted gazes, the unexplained absences, the lingering scent of unfamiliar perfumes. The knife of betrayal turns slowest when wielded by the hand you once held in sacred vows. Gomer's heart had never truly been his. Like a bird that tolerates captivity only until the cage door is carelessly left open, she yearned for the false freedom of her former life. The temples of Baal and Asherah called to her with promises of ecstasy and abandon, with rituals that sanctified lust under the guise of worship, that celebrated the flesh while starving the soul. The day she left was like any other day, except for the silence that followed. Hosea returned to an empty house, finding absence where presence should have been, finding silence where laughter once echoed. She had returned to her lovers, to the men who offered silver and promises as empty as their hearts, to the cult prostitution that masqueraded as religious devotion. She had traded covenant for convenience, faithfulness for fleeting pleasure, the love of a prophet for the temporary affections of strangers. Hosea stood in that empty house, surrounded by the tangible evidence of the life they had built together. Toys scattered across floors, garments hanging from pegs, the smell of bread still lingering from the morning's baking, and he felt the full weight of divine heartbreak. For this was not merely a prophet experiencing human betrayal. This was a man being given experiential knowledge of God's own pain. Every tear that Hosea shed, God had shed 1,000 times over Israel's unfaithfulness. Every sleepless night, every moment of wondering where she was and with whom, every instance of public humiliation as neighbors whispered and pointed, this was the divine experience translated into human terms. The book of Hosea chapter 2 verses 2 through 13 records the Lord's own lament, speaking through his prophet, describing Israel's adultery with foreign gods, her attribution of blessings to false deities, her shameless pursuit of idols while forgetting the one who had given her grain and wine and oil, who had multiplied her silver and gold which she then used for Baal. The destruction was not immediate but gradual, like a disease eating away at flesh from within. Gomer's descent was both spiritual and physical. The lovers who had promised so much delivered only exploitation. The freedom she sought became bondage of the cruelest kind. The glittering world of temple prostitution, with its wine and incense and fevered embraces, revealed itself as the trap it had always been. She who had been a prophet's wife, honored and provided for, became a commodity, passed from hand to hand, her value diminishing with each transaction, her dignity eroding like soil beneath relentless rain. The destruction extended beyond her personal degradation. Her children grew up marked by her absence and their father's grief. The community that had once known her as the prophet's wife now knew her as something far different, something spoken of in hushed tones or crude jests depending on the company. Yet through all of this, through the public shame and private anguish, Hosea's love did not die. It should have. By every human standard, by every law written and unwritten, he would have been justified in pronouncing her dead to him, in severing all ties and rebuilding his life on the ruins of their failed covenant. But love, when it flows from the heart of God through the vessel of a human soul, operates according to different mathematics. It calculates by addition when logic demands subtraction. It multiplies where reason insists on division. Hosea prayed through long nights, wrestling with God and with his own heart, feeling the tension between justice and mercy, between what was deserved and what was possible through grace. Years passed, measured in seasons and festivals, in children growing taller and a man growing more intimate with sorrow. Hosea continued his prophetic ministry, speaking words of judgment and hope to a nation that largely refused to listen. His messages carried the authority of lived experience. When he spoke of unfaithfulness, he knew its taste. When he proclaimed God's persistent love, he understood its cost. The people heard his words, but few grasped the depth of the reality behind them. They saw a cuckolded husband, not comprehending that they were looking at a mirror of their own betrayal of the divine. Then came the word that would test the limits of obedient love. The Lord spoke again to Hosea, and his command was even more shocking than the first. The directive is recorded in Hosea chapter 3 verse 1. Go again, the Lord commanded. Go and love a woman who is loved by another and is an adulteress. Go and love her as the Lord loves the people of Israel, though they turn to other gods. The implication was devastating. Gomer had not simply left. She had sold herself into slavery, had descended so far that she now belonged to another, purchased like livestock, owned like property. And God was commanding his prophet to go and buy her back. Hosea made his way through streets he knew too well, past faces that watched with mixtures of pity and contempt. He arrived at the place of transaction, the slave market where human dignity was bartered for silver and barley. And there she was, Gomer, the woman he had married in hope, the mother of his children, the one who had shattered his heart into fragments so small that only divine intervention could reassemble them. She stood in chains, her beauty dimmed but not extinguished, her eyes hollow with shame and resignation. She did not expect rescue. She had long since surrendered any hope of redemption. She had made her choices, followed her desires, and now she would pay the price that such choices inevitably demand. But Hosea stepped forward. The transaction is recorded with stark simplicity in Hosea chapter 3 verse 2. He bought her for 15 shekels of silver and a homer and a lethek of barley. The price was specific, calculated, the cost of redeeming one who had thrown away what was freely given. Hosea counted out the coins, measured the grain, and purchased the woman who was legally his wife, ransoming her from the consequences of her own rebellion. The symbolism was profound and unmistakable. This was exactly what God was doing for Israel. Though they had prostituted themselves to idols, though they had sold themselves into spiritual slavery, God was willing to pay the redemption price, to buy them back, to restore what had been catastrophically broken. The journey home was silent, weighted with too many emotions to name. Shame and gratitude, disbelief and dawning hope, the death of old patterns and the terrifying possibility of new beginnings. Hosea brought Gomer back to his house, back to the children who barely remembered their mother, back to a life she had scorned. But the restoration came with conditions, with boundaries established not to punish but to heal, to create space for genuine transformation. The terms are laid out in Hosea chapter 3 verse 3. She would remain with him, but there would be a period of waiting, of purification, of learning what it meant to be faithful before resuming the full privileges of covenant relationship. She would not play the whore, would not belong to another man, and Hosea himself would wait with her through this season of restoration. What goes through the mind of a woman so redeemed? How does one process being loved when love is utterly undeserved? Gomer had destroyed everything Hosea had given her. She had taken his name and dragged it through the mud of public scandal. She had abandoned their children, squandered his provision, made a mockery of his devotion. She had chosen strangers over a husband, fleeting pleasure over lasting covenant, the lie of false freedom over the truth of faithful love. By every measure, she deserved abandonment. By every calculation, justice demanded her permanent exile from his presence and protection. Yet here she was, bought back, brought home, given another chance at the life she had thrown away. The restoration was not instantaneous magic, not a divine snap of fingers that erased all consequences and rewound time to before the betrayal. Healing is a process, not an event. Trust, once shattered, must be rebuilt fragment by fragment, decision by decision, day by day of choosing faithfulness over the easy slide back into old patterns. Gomer had to learn what it meant to stay, to resist the pull of familiar temptations, to find satisfaction in covenant rather than constantly seeking the next excitement. She had to discover that true freedom is not the absence of boundaries but the security found within loving commitment. She had to become, perhaps for the first time in her life, what she had been called to be from the beginning: a faithful wife, a present mother, a woman whose identity was anchored in covenant rather than floating on the tides of impulse and desire. And Hosea, what of the prophet whose life had become a sermon, whose marriage was a parable written in tears and silver? He had to choose forgiveness daily, had to battle against the natural human tendency toward bitterness and suspicion. He had to love when love felt like foolishness, had to extend grace when justice seemed more appropriate, had to model divine mercy in a human body still capable of hurt and resentment. His prophetic message gained new dimensions, new depths of authority. When he spoke of God's love for Israel, he spoke from the trenches of lived experience. When he proclaimed the possibility of restoration, he offered not theory but testimony. The book of Hosea weaves together the personal story and the national prophecy, showing how Hosea's marriage to Gomer illustrated God's relationship with Israel. The beautiful poetry of Hosea chapter 2 verses 14 through 20 shows God's promise to Israel, to allure her back, to speak tenderly to her heart, to betroth her to himself forever in righteousness and justice, in steadfast love and mercy, in faithfulness. The same God who commanded Hosea to redeem his unfaithful wife was declaring his intention to redeem his unfaithful people. The same mercy extended in that slave market would be offered on a cosmic scale to a nation that had prostituted itself to idols and foreign alliances. But redemption in Scripture never comes without cost, and prophecy unfulfilled always finds its fulfillment in time's fullness. The northern kingdom of Israel did not heed Hosea's warnings. They continued in their idolatry and injustice, in their empty religious rituals divorced from genuine devotion, in their trust in military power and political alliances rather than in the God who had established them as a nation. The consequences prophesied through Hosea's children's names came to pass. The destruction arrived in the form of Assyrian armies, in the siege of Samaria recorded in 2 Kings chapter 17, in the deportation and exile that scattered the 10 northern tribes into oblivion. The mercy symbolized by God's redemption of Gomer was offered but rejected by the majority, and so judgment fell as surely as dawn follows darkness. Yet within the book of Hosea, even amidst the pronouncements of doom, hope persists like a stubborn seed pushing through scorched earth. Hosea chapter 11 captures the divine tension between justice and love, between what is deserved and what is desired. The Lord speaks of Israel as his child, whom he called out of Egypt, whom he taught to walk, whom he held with cords of kindness and bands of love. But they turned to false gods, so destruction seems inevitable. Yet in verses 8 and 9, the divine heart cries out in anguish, refusing to give Israel up, refusing to execute his fierce anger, for he is God and not man, the Holy One in their midst who will not come to destroy. This is the heart that beat in Hosea's chest as he purchased Gomer from slavery. This is the love that defies human logic and transcends the mathematics of merit. The story of Hosea and Gomer stands as one of the most powerful illustrations of divine love in all of Scripture. It reveals a God who pursues the unfaithful, who pays the redemption price for those who have sold themselves into bondage, who offers restoration to those who deserve only judgment. It shows that love, when it originates from the eternal heart of God, is not a feeling that fluctuates with circumstances but a commitment that endures through betrayal, a choice that persists through rejection, a covenant that remains even when the other party has abandoned all covenant obligations. This ancient story speaks with urgent relevance into our contemporary moment. We live in an age that has redefined love as emotion, reduced covenant to convenience, and celebrated the pursuit of personal satisfaction above all other values. We have been taught that love should be easy, that commitment is optional, that when relationships become difficult the solution is dissolution rather than perseverance. We have imbibed a cultural narrative that equates freedom with the absence of binding obligation, that sees faithfulness as optional rather than foundational, that views covenant as chains rather than as the structure within which true intimacy can flourish. But Hosea's story confronts our shallow understanding with a love that is simultaneously terrifying and beautiful in its intensity. It reveals a love that does not quit when things get hard, that does not calculate whether the other person deserves continued devotion, that measures its commitment not by the response received but by the character of the one who loves. This is not the stuff of greeting cards and romantic comedies. This is love that bleeds, that sacrifices, that pays prices it should not have to pay, that extends mercy to those who have weaponized that very mercy against the giver. The implications extend beyond marriage relationships to every sphere of human existence. How do we love those who have betrayed us? How do we extend grace to those who have damaged us? How do we maintain covenant with people who have abandoned their covenant obligations toward us? The human answer is simple. We don't. We cut ties, protect ourselves, move on to relationships that are easier and more immediately gratifying. But Hosea's example, reflecting the divine heart, suggests a different path. Not a path of doormat weakness or enabling dysfunction, but a path of redemptive love that is willing to pay the cost of restoration while establishing the boundaries necessary for genuine healing. The story also speaks prophetically into the relationship between God and humanity. Every human being is Gomer to some degree. We have all prostituted ourselves to lesser things, have all sought satisfaction in cisterns that hold no water, have all betrayed covenant love in pursuit of counterfeits that promise much and deliver emptiness. We have all, in the language of Romans chapter 3 verse 23, sinned and fallen short of God's glory. We have all traded the faithful love of our Creator for the temporary pleasures of rebellion, for the illusion of autonomy, for the false gods of money, power, pleasure, and self-determination. And yet God pursues. Like Hosea walking to the slave market with silver in his hand, God comes to where we have sold ourselves into bondage. The redemption price was not measured in shekels and barley but in blood and suffering, in the sacrifice of Jesus Christ on a Roman cross, the ultimate expression of love that pursues the unfaithful and pays the price for their restoration. The gospel itself is Hosea's story writ large across human history, the tale of a bridegroom who seeks his wayward bride, who pays the ransom for her release, who offers not just forgiveness but full restoration into covenant relationship. The beauty and the scandal of this love is that it is offered to all, regardless of how far we have wandered or how thoroughly we have betrayed the one who made us. The woman at the well, the tax collector in the tree, the thief on the cross, the persecutor on the Damascus road, all are Gomer. All have been bought back. All are offered the possibility of restoration. The only question is whether we will accept the redemption offered or continue in our enslavement to sin and self, insisting on our right to our own destruction even as the Redeemer stands ready to bring us home. As we close this meditation on love that endures through utter devastation, consider the mystery at its heart. Hosea did not redeem Gomer because she had earned it or because she had changed. He redeemed her while she was still in slavery, still in the consequences of her choices, still bearing the marks of her betrayal. His love was not a response to her worthiness but an expression of his own character, and through him, an expression of God's character. This is grace in its purest form, love extended not because the object of love deserves it but because the nature of the lover compels it. The prophet's life became the message. His redemption of Gomer preached louder than any sermon he delivered, illustrated more powerfully than any metaphor he crafted. He lived the truth that love is not primarily a feeling but a commitment, not an emotion but a choice, not a response to worthiness but an act of will grounded in covenant. He demonstrated that restoration is possible, that betrayal does not have to be the final word, that even the most shattered relationship can be rebuilt when both parties are willing to do the painful work of healing and when grace provides the foundation for new beginnings. The story challenges us to examine our own hearts. Where are we in this narrative? Are we Hosea, called to extend love to someone who has betrayed us, wrestling with the cost of redemption and the risk of further heartbreak? Are we Gomer, standing in chains of our own making, unable to believe that anyone would pay the price to buy us back? Are we the children, collateral damage in someone else's story of betrayal and redemption, trying to make sense of a broken world? Or are we the watching community, quick to judge and slow to extend the mercy we ourselves have received? Most fundamentally, we are all players in a cosmic drama of betrayal and redemption. Small reflections of Hosea's story being lived out in the grand narrative of God's relationship with humanity. We are the unfaithful ones who have been loved anyway, the rebels who have been ransomed, the prostitutes of the soul who have been purchased back from slavery and offered a seat at the family table. And if we have received such love, such undeserved mercy, such costly grace, how can we withhold it from others? How can we refuse to extend to our fellow human beings even a fraction of the forgiveness we have received from the divine? The final word belongs not to betrayal but to hope, not to destruction but to restoration, not to the darkness of slavery but to the light of redemption. Hosea's story, and through it God's story, declares that love can endure what should destroy it, that faithfulness can persist through repeated betrayal, that redemption is possible even from the deepest bondage, that restoration can rebuild what seems irreparably shattered. It announces that the end of our story is not determined by our worst choices but by the character of the one who loves us, not by our capacity for faithfulness but by his commitment to covenant, not by what we deserve but by what he freely gives. If this story has stirred something in your heart, if you have glimpsed in these ancient events a reflection of your own journey or recognized in Hosea's love an echo of the divine love pursuing you, then let it move you to action. Share this message with those who need to hear it, with those who are standing in chains believing they are beyond redemption, with those who are wrestling with whether to extend forgiveness to someone who has betrayed them. Subscribe to continue exploring these profound truths that connect ancient scripture to contemporary life, that reveal the timeless patterns of human need and divine grace. Let Hosea's story become part of your story, a reminder that no betrayal is beyond God's redemptive reach, no brokenness beyond his healing power, no one beyond the scope of his relentless, pursuing, covenant love. This is the gospel, lived out in the life of a prophet and his unfaithful wife, pointing forward to the greater redemption accomplished by Christ, available to all who will receive it. May we have the courage to believe in such love, the wisdom to receive it, and the grace to extend it to others as freely as it has been given to us.